Okay, thank you all for coming. The first thing I'm going to do is introduce my cameraman.
Hello, I'm Pete.
Thank you, and now we're going to introduce our audience.
Hi, I'm Sabrina.
Hello, I'm Pat.
And I'm Stacy.
Hi, I'm Candace.
And I'm Bubba.
Thank you all for coming. The first thing I'd like to say is that we all know the difference between Tex-Mex and Mexican food. Because we live here in Texas, we can appreciate the subtle differences between the two kinds of foods. Unfortunately, people from out of state might not understand the difference. They might lump Tex-Mex in with Mexican food, thinking, well, what's the difference anyway? It's all the same. Well, we know it's different, and because of that, our lives are a little enriched because of it. I'd like to apply that analogy to the difference between non-objective art and abstract art. Behind me, we have two paintings. Both of them were painted around the turn of the 20th century. They were both contemporary, they're both bright and colorful, they're both very modern. And they were both painted by artists who were not only contemporaries, but they were also friends, yet they belonged to two completely different genres. This painting behind me is painted by a man named Pablo Picasso. He was born in Spain, and he was an art prodigy. He was destined for greatness. This painting he painted in 1907. It was first exhibited in 1913. At an art exhibit in Paris, this was the first time the world had ever seen what was to become known as abstract art. Let's define what abstract art is. Abstract art happens when an artist takes a subject and removes the reality of it through line, color, and form. For example, in this piece, Picasso has taken 5 nudes and taken the realism of them and abstracted it. But what's important about abstract art is that the focus of the art remains the subject of the piece. Now, abstract art has a lot of subcategories. Cubism is one, futurism, surrealism. Abstract art contains quite a few different categories, but it still remains the subject is the focus, it's just the realism of the subject has been removed. This piece is a Cubist piece by George Braque, not by Picasso. George Braque was a good friend of Picasso, and together they developed what was become known as Cubism. I want to focus on this piece. This piece is by a man named Constantin Brancusi. He was born of peasant parents in Romania, and when he was 11 years old, he ran away from home and on foot managed to make it to Paris, where from these humble beginnings, he became known as the greatest and most influential sculptor of the 20th century. Now, what's important about this particular piece is that it's about as far abstracted as you can get. Without knowing what the subject matter of this piece is, you probably couldn't guess it. The name of it is Bird in Space, and this takes the subject and abstracts it about as far as it can be away from reality. Yet what the focus of the piece is still the subject itself. Now, while these men were busy abstracting their subjects, there was a man in Russia by the name of Vasily Kandinsky. He was a lawyer and had a successful career, but at the age of 30, he abandoned everything and moved to Munich to become a painter. Vasily Kandinsky did just like Picasso. He dabbled and experimented in abstract art, but he, unlike the others, was never satisfied with his paintings. He struggled and he struggled finding meaning in his paintings until one day he was coming home to the studio, and it was twilight. There was light coming in, and it shone from a window onto a painting that had been turned on its side. Now, Kandinsky didn't know that. He just didn't know what it was he was looking at. He came up to it and he realized that whatever it was he was looking at, it was the answer that he had been seeking. And when he realized that it was just a painting of his own that had been turned on its side, he realized at that moment that it was the object that was harming his paintings. It wasn't that something was missing from his paintings or something was wrong with his paintings exactly. It's just that he needed to remove the subject matter of his paintings. And at that moment, non-objective art was born. And by definition, non-objective art has no subject. And so by definition, non-objective art and abstract art are two different things. This piece right here was created by a man named Paul Klee. He was a contemporary of Kandinsky, and between the two of them, they explored and let the world know about non-objective art. This man, although you've probably never heard the name Paul Klee, was revered among his equals, and in fact Pablo Picasso himself visited him when he was ill and considered him one of the greatest artists of all time. I'd like to focus a little bit on this one. You've probably all recognized this style. It's by an artist by the name of Piet Mondrian. He's from the Netherlands, and he's our most spiritual artist. He considered art to be spiritual and beautiful, and he was not satisfied unless he could find that spiritual pureness in art. And what he did is he epitomized the non-objective art movement when he said, "The emotion of beauty is obscured by the object. Therefore, the object must be removed from the picture." I'm going to have to skip over these two for right now, and let's go back to the beginning. These two paintings, one is abstract and one is not objective. Both of the people who painted these paintings were influenced by men of the 19th century, the late 19th century. This was artists who they pushed the limits of post-impressionist paintings so far that abstract art could not help but be the result. These men who painted during the early 20th century were also influenced by the world around them. The Industrial Revolution pushed the boundaries of what had ever been known about technology. These men pushed the boundaries of art as far as it would go, so much so that they broke rules that had been set in stone since the Stone Age. They also were influenced by the chaos that was happening at the time with the Great War, later become known as World War I, and the Russian Revolution. They had to look into themselves to find the peace and serenity that was lacking in the world around them. But most importantly, these men who were painting at this time were influenced by each other. They were friends, they were colleagues, they learned from each other, they influenced each other, and they exhibited together. What I'd like to know now is, can you tell the difference between those two paintings? Abstract and non-objective. It is not always easy to tell, but just like knowing the difference between Tex-Mex and Mexican food, we are enriched when we know the history behind the art, when we know what the intent of the artist was. When we know the difference and we can appreciate that difference, we are not just moving through our lives, going to work, coming home, sleeping. We are truly alive. Now I'd like to open up the discussion to any questions that y'all might have. Yes, ma'am?
What were those two that you skipped?
Oh, yes, thank you. I skipped this one right here. Rauschenberg is the artist. The name of the piece is Glider. This would be considered a non-objective piece. This one here is by Jasper Johns. And he is an artist who's still living today. And this would be considered an abstract piece, but you wouldn't necessarily know the difference without knowing the history behind the artists and their meaning. That's why I wanted to bring them up. These are artists that have painted today. Jasper Johns is still alive. Rauschenberg only died a couple of years ago. These men would not be painting what they were painting if it were not for the men of the early 20th century. Did anybody have some questions? Yes, yes.
The artist that you said was the most spiritually pure. Could you go back to that painting and maybe elaborate a little more about why that is?
Why? Well, Piet Mondrian was, again, he sought purity and spiritualness in his art. He didn't care about the subject. And like he said, the subject harms the painting. But he was so obsessed with purity in art that he actually used primary colors: red, yellow, blue, black, and white. You can't get any more pure than that. He did that because he was seeking spiritual pureness in his art. Does anybody else have any questions? You good? All right, well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, and we've concluded. Thank you.